When I told my mother-in-law I was going back to my hometown to have my baby, she replied, "Go ahead. I don't want to see you." I felt relieved because I had been waiting for her to say that. I thought to myself, finally, I won't have to deal with her anymore. My name is Emily, and I'm almost 28 years old. My mom passed away when I was very young, so my grandmother took care of me while my dad ran his clothing business. My dad was strict, and I always did what he said. I never dated anyone because of his rules, but I had accepted that as my fate. After college, I briefly worked for my dad, but he said it was too hard to work together, so I had to quit. He didn't want me to work elsewhere either, but seeing my friends get jobs and start families made me want to work too. One night, I asked my dad if I could get a job. He simply said no without explaining why. I tried to reason with him, saying I needed to gain experience in society, but he shut me down. He insisted I stay at home. Frustrated, I threatened to leave home and find work elsewhere. My dad didn't like that and told me to stop talking back. Feeling upset, I stormed out and cried in my room for a long time. Eventually, I called my college friend Lisa and asked if I could stay at her place for a while. Lisa, who lived in a luxurious condo her parents gave her, agreed, sensing something was wrong. I quietly packed my suitcase and left home, hoping not to disturb my dad. I wrote a note explaining that I was staying with a friend and left it on my desk. Then, I took a taxi to Lisa's apartment. When I arrived, she welcomed me with my favorite coffee. I thanked her and poured out everything about the argument with my dad and why I left home. Lisa sympathized, saying I deserved freedom. It hit me hard that I had always followed my dad's orders without question, but now I longed for my own independence. Lisa agreed, saying it was normal to want to meet new people and have fun. She asked if my dad knew I was there, and I told her I left a note, but he didn't know any of my friends. Lisa suggested we go to bed since it was late, and she had prepared a separate room for me to sleep in. The next day, Lisa went to work, and when I checked my phone, I saw several missed calls from my dad. Feeling bad for worrying him, I sent him an email to reassure him that I was okay. Later in the evening, after Lisa finished work, she invited me to join her for a drink. Excited but inexperienced with socializing over drinks, I agreed to go out. When I got to the meeting place, I found Lisa waiting with two men. She introduced them, pointing to her boyfriend first, then to the single man, Max. With a warm smile, Max introduced himself, and our relationship began. Max worked at a small company in the clothing industry. At first, I wondered if Max's company was similar to my father's, but I quickly pushed the thought aside. Max's family situation was different from mine. He only had his mother around, but he didn't elaborate, and I didn't pry. One day, Max expressed his desire to meet my father, but I wasn't ready to go back home yet, despite exchanging emails with my dad. Instead, I suggested meeting Max's mom. He eagerly agreed, even suggesting we could visit her that very day. Wanting to bring a gift, I stopped by a bakery for a cake, knowing Max's mom appreciated such gestures. As it turned out, my mother-in-law not only appreciated gifts, but also became irritable if not presented with one. When we arrived at Max's house, his mother greeted us at the door, having received a message from him. She immediately questioned me about my life, expressing skepticism about my employment status and implying I lived a privileged life. I explained about my deceased mother and my father's job, but she dismissed my responses. Max, sensing the tension, urged us inside, asking if I had brought anything. Feeling rushed, I handed over the cake, apologizing for its simplicity. My mother-in-law snatched it from me, making a sarcastic remark before accepting it. In just a few minutes, I grew to dislike her, feeling sorry for anyone who had to deal with her as a mother-in-law. As soon as we stepped into the living room, my mother-in-law bombarded me with questions to which I responded with vague answers. However, she persisted, firing questions at me as if I were a suspect in an interrogation room. Feeling overwhelmed by the relentless questioning, I whispered to Max that I should probably leave soon. This seemed to infuriate my mother-in-law, her face flushing with anger. She accused me of hating her and giving insincere responses. Max tried to calm her down, but she lashed out, questioning his choice in bringing such a supposedly rude woman home. Annoyed, I defended myself, asking for specific feedback if there was something I could improve. This only seemed to aggravate her more, as she accused me of being cheeky and disliking her. I wanted to agree, but I just couldn't. I'm exhausted and longing to go home, I explained. My mother-in-law's response caught me off guard. How audacious of you. I wonder what kind of upbringing your parents gave you. They must have been lacking. Her words stung, and tears welled up in my eyes. Now you're crying for sympathy. If you want to leave so badly, go ahead. It might do you good. Oh, and by the way, I'll give this cake you brought to my dog Charlie, but he's quite picky, so he might not eat such a cheap cake. She pointed at the cake I had brought. Max intervened, telling his mother to stop. You really don't know how to judge people, he scolded her. Max's remark seemed to deflate his mother's argumentative energy. All I want is the best for you, Max, she countered, her tone softer. Max stood his ground, asserting his adulthood and his ability to handle his own affairs. His words brought tears to his mother's eyes, and she left the room, visibly upset. Feeling hurt by the harsh words of Max's mother, I decided to leave. However, Max caught up with me and apologized sincerely. Emily, I'm sorry for my mom's behavior. She might be feeling threatened, thinking she's losing me. I'll talk to her about it, okay? Please don't let this incident discourage you from visiting again. His words reassured me, but I couldn't shake off the hurt caused by his mother's comments about my parents. Max, what your mother said about my parents really hurt me. I don't think I want to see her again. As the sadness washed over me, tears welled up, and I found solace in Max's comforting embrace. After a while, he suggested we go somewhere, and we ended up at the beach, sitting on a sandy bench, watching the waves for hours. 2 months later, I discovered I was pregnant. When I shared the news with Max, he proposed marriage. Let's make it official. We don't need a grand ceremony, but we can live together in my house. I don't earn much, so renting an apartment isn't feasible. I'll talk to my mom about being more considerate towards you, Emily. Despite my reservations about living with his mother, I agreed, realizing it was our only option. Okay, I'll do my best to get along with your mother. And so, I found myself living with my mother-in-law after getting married. I returned home to inform my father about the decision. His face lit up with joy when he spotted me. It's wonderful to see you looking so well. We've been in touch, but it feels like ages since our last meeting. My father greeted me warmly. I'm sorry, Dad. I have something important to discuss with you, I replied, sensing his anticipation shift to curiosity. I proceeded to share the news of meeting Max, my pregnancy, and our plan to marry. My father listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he offered a simple, "Well, congratulations. I can't wait to meet my grandchild," though his smile seemed strained. "Thank you, Dad. I'm sorry for causing you any pain," I apologized, tears streaming down my cheeks. To my surprise, my father's eyes glistened with tears too. Instead of anger, his tender response hurt me more deeply. Eventually, I moved into my mother-in-law's home. Lisa, who had been a pillar of support since I left home, expressed her excitement about meeting my baby and shared her own hopes for marriage. Despite the mixed emotions, we made plans to dine together. Originally scheduled for Sunday, my mother-in-law insisted on moving the date to Saturday, citing superstitions. The move went smoothly, with the movers diligently transferring my belongings while my mother-in-law observed silently. Despite repeated warnings from the movers about the danger, my mother-in-law refused to step back. Once the move was completed, she called me over and questioned if I had given the movers their due payment. Confused, I asked, "Huh?" Sensing my confusion, she assumed I was feigning ignorance and left to rectify what she thought was a mistake. When she returned, she handed an exorbitant sum to the movers' leaders, assuming I hadn't provided enough. Stunned by the amount, I questioned her decision. "You gave them that much?" I exclaimed. She brushed it off. claiming it was for the best and citing superstition about avoiding curses by being generous. Knowing it would only lead to another argument, I remained silent, unwilling to engage further. My mother-in-law wore a smug expression, convinced of her righteousness. Just then, Max arrived and noticed the tension. He intervened, asking his mother what had happened. With a dismissive reply, she walked away. Max reassured me, expressing his disapproval of his mother's behavior. Grateful for his support, I decided not to mention the incident to avoid further conflict with my mother-in-law, knowing it would only worsen our relationship. After settling in, my mother-in-law noticeably avoided speaking to me, leaving me in peaceful silence for weeks at a time. One day, Max brought home some work documents in an envelope marked with the name Star Textiles Incorporated, causing me to gasp. This was a familiar name from my time working at my father's company. They were one of our subcontractors. Curious, I asked Max about the envelope's origin. "Is this from your company?" I inquired innocently. "Yes. Why do you ask?" he responded. Sensing it was best not to mention the connection between his company and my father's, I simply replied, "I was just curious. I realized I don't know much about your company." Max explained, "We're just a small subcontractor. If our parent company were to drop us, we'd go bankrupt instantly, and all the employees would lose their jobs." Max chuckled softly, a hint of nostalgia in his expression. Around a month later, I noticed a change in Max's routine. He started returning home from work later than usual and seemed visibly upset. Concerned, I asked him what was wrong. "You've been coming home late lately. Is everything okay?" "You seem different," I inquired. Max confessed, "The company is facing some challenges." "What kind of challenges?" I probed further. Max sighed. "The parent company unexpectedly slashed our orders by half. Our boss is desperately trying to convince them to maintain our business relationship. And we're also searching for new clients. But if things don't improve, we might go bankrupt." As I listened to Max's worries, I considered asking my dad for help. However, I knew my father's strict principles wouldn't allow him to assist a business partner based on personal feelings alone. It seemed like many of the company's partners were facing similar hardships. I disclosed to Max that my father's company was the parent company of his. Initially surprised, Max pleaded with me earnestly, his eyes gleaming with hope. "Emily, please implore your father not to cut ties with us," he urged. Regretfully, I explained, "Max, my father is firm when it comes to business. Personal matters wouldn't influence his decisions." Desperate, Max persisted. "Could you at least try?" Reluctantly, I agreed, knowing it likely wouldn't sway my father. Yet Max knelt before me, tears in his eyes, begging for help. "Please, I beg you," he pleaded. Frustrated, I implored him to stop, but I promised to speak to my father nonetheless. As Max lifted his head, tears of relief streamed down his face. That night, I called my father and relayed Max's plea. Surprisingly, my father agreed to help. "So, Max works for Star Textiles Incorporated? Then I must assist them," he stated. I was taken aback, expecting him to decline outright due to his strict business principles. However, he outlined two conditions. First, he would continue business with Star Textiles but wanted Max to join his company. Second, he requested that both Max and I move in with him. Puzzled, I questioned his motives for wanting us to live with him. Uncomfortably, my father admitted, "I just want my daughter close by." I accepted his conditions but sought clarification on why he had decided to reduce dealings with Star Textiles initially. He explained that a new company had offered an enticing proposal, prompting the shift in partnerships. Upon conducting some research, we discovered that the new company my father intended to partner with had a history of unfulfilled promises, prompting us to reconsider the deal. So, Star Textiles would have been fine even if I hadn't intervened? I asked, amused by the irony. "Maybe," my father chuckled, and I couldn't help but laugh along. After hanging up, I promptly informed Max of my father's conditions. He sighed with relief at the news that Star Textiles was no longer at risk, but expressed hesitance about joining my father's company. It's difficult for me to leave Star Textiles, Emily. I've built strong bonds there, and am unsure about starting anew, he admitted. Respecting his decision, I relayed his sentiments to my father, who acknowledged Max's dedication and allowed him to remain at Star Textiles. However, he remained firm about us moving in with him. Delighted by my father's decision, I cautioned Max not to disclose my father's involvement to his mother, knowing she would disapprove. He agreed, understanding the importance of keeping it a secret. Weeks later, as the time for our child's birth approached, I made the decision to return home. Despite having only my father and grandmother there, it felt preferable to staying with my mother-in-law. Waiting for the opportune moment when my mother-in-law was occupied with her afternoon tea, I approached her to break the news. Mother-in-law, regarding my childbirth, I've chosen to go back home. It's just my dad and my active grandmother there, I explained calmly. Her response was as expected, filled with disdain and resentment. By all means, go back. I don't want to see your face, she spat out. Unfazed by her reaction, I assured her, you won't have to see me anymore. Max will soon be moving in with my parents as well. Her confusion was palpable as she questioned my decision. Max is too busy with work to move, I reassured my mother-in-law, trying to ease any tension. Just then, Max entered and excitedly informed his mother, Mom, everything is going to be fine with the company now. Emily helped me out. Confused, she asked, what are you talking about? Max explained, Emily's dad is the owner of the parent company of the company I work for. Shocked, my mother-in-law's demeanor changed as she turned her attention to me. Emily, I had no idea you were connected to Max's company in that way. I've been terribly rude to you, she admitted, bowing deeply. It's all right now, I replied, trying to diffuse the tension. However, she surprised us all by requesting to live with my parents as well. Both Max and I declined, preferring not to dwell on the past hurtful interactions. I don't want to live with you, mother-in-law. Being here would only remind me of everything that's happened, I explained gently. Her tears flowing, she pleaded desperately, but we stood firm in our decision. Months later, we decided to visit my mother-in-law's house, only to find it empty and eerily quiet. Concerned, Max called out for his mother, receiving no response. As we searched the house, we found her emaciated and frail, lost in her own world. Despite our attempts to engage her, she remained silent, focusing only on the cake we had brought. As she devoured it hungrily, I couldn't help but think, well, mother-in-law, you brought this on yourself.